We often think of tradition as something of the past, but what if we consider how tradition actually carries us into the future? In a 2023 lecture, anthropologist Tim Ingold reimagines how we view generational flows. He challenges the very common idea of generations as stacked layers and proposes that instead we imagine them as the intertwining strands of a rope. As each old strand gives out, new ones are fed in, and so this rope continues to wind indefinitely. So we begin to see how, as generations are connected and knowledge and traditions get passed down, we are connected in this unbroken link that sustains life. But the layered image is very common whenever we consider human pasts and future. We think of the sediments of the earth, we think of the deposits in an archaeological site, we think of the layers of documents in an archive, we even think of the layers of our consciousness. But in terms of generations and ancestors, I think the rope metaphor idea that Ingold proposes makes a lot more sense. And so I want to share another metaphor that Ingold offers us. He asks us to imagine that we're queuing for an ice cream. There's an ice cream van up ahead of us, there's people in front of us, there's people behind us, and this queue is continuously shuffling forward. The people in front of us are following people in front of them, and the people behind us are following us. So in this queue, our ancestors are actually in the future. They're the people in front of us, because they're already where we're going to be at some point later. And our descendants are behind us because they're still walking in the footsteps that we have left for them at some point. So for me, that is quite mind-blowing, and it really helps me rethink botanical histories. Traditional plant knowledge is ancestral knowledge that's passed down through generations. It's knowledge that's shaped through direct interactions with ecosystems, and it's deeply rooted in kinship and belief systems, and passed down through embodied or lived practices. Practices like oral histories, religion, apprenticeship schemes, and also hands-on learning. But it's this focus on the embodied rather than on written records that makes this knowledge vulnerable to disappearance and to exploitation. On the other end, we have conventional plant knowledge, or the science of botany. This system relies heavily on written records and on material archives. These archives originate in the Renaissance period, and they're systematized collections of plants, of preserved specimens, and of catalog data. They help us construct like an abstract mapping of the plant kingdom, and of course help us understand the evolution of plants, their relationships to each other, their chemistry, the history of science, taxonomy, and so on and so forth. But what the conventional botanical archive reveals really is a very detached and a distant view of nature, of learning, of plants. It also reveals a history of marginalizing any other forms of knowledge, especially embodied knowledge. We know that botany contributed greatly to the exploitation of traditional indigenous people, which has led to issues of biopiracy, intellectual property, as well as over-extraction. This has had a profound effect on our ecosystems, on livelihoods, because it shifted reliance on commercial rather than kinship structures on which we've relied to for centuries. So a herbarium is really a kind of morgue for traditional plant knowledge. There, the flowers are pressed, they are mounted on card and stacked into layers and drawers of cabinets. But whilst all this effort goes into preserving them into this state in which they arrived, almost all of the original context and histories are lost. These archives are reminders of lost histories, particularly because they fail to acknowledge so much of the knowledge and skills and expertise afforded to them by indigenous actors. But there's a kind of paradigm shift happening right now in the archival world where, particularly through interdisciplinary research, these actors and voices that were hidden in the archives are beginning to emerge and beginning to challenge the histories of botany, but also to kind of ask us to stop and think, why are we preserving this knowledge? And how can we use it to move forward? While both of the systems, conventional and traditional, are vital to our survival, there's a lack of ethical communication between them. I see the archive not as a stack of documents and specimens and data. I see it as a living, dynamic space where intergenerational and intercultural exchange can happen. A space where traditional knowledge can be adapted to the present day needs and realities, and where diverse form of knowledge can be represented in a horizontal, accessible, and fair way. Archives are always metaphorical, so it's up to each generation to decide what metaphors are guiding us forward. I'm currently activating a living botanical archive in rural Ogun State. This archive I'm assembling through conversations I'm having with school children, herbalists, artists, chefs, and other members of the community. And I'm recording their stories and memories about medicinal plants and connecting them, linking them to a physical space, a garden. So this garden is a kind of transitional space in the sense that it's located in between an artist residency house and a commercial plant vegetable farm, and the road that connects the nearby villages to both of these spots. I'm inspired by the idea of an ecotone. An ecotone it's a term that describes a zone in between two distinct ecosystems. Whilst the boundaries of an ecotone are not always clearly defined, they are real and observable phenomena like savanna, mangrove, and estuaries. But it's because ecotones are known as spaces of increased species adaptability, collaboration, and resilience that I find them to be such a wonderful metaphor for the archive that I'm creating. And you can see the beginnings of this space, which instead of being frozen in the time of its making, will grow and expand in a relational manner through conversations, workshops, and cultivation sessions. The labels of the plants will include both the Yoruba names and the scientific names, as well as a QR code that links to a digital catalog. And this catalog will include all the data that you don't usually see in botanical collections, such as the personal, familial stories, the sensorial experiences, and just anything that might help us to begin representing embodied knowledge across these spaces. Engaging different methodologies and voices is one pathway to a more ethical sharing and remembering and collaboration. So the spiral boundary of this archive is a symbol of the interconnectedness and the continuous flow of life cycles, of growth, of transformations. But the boundary itself is not permanent. As with the garden expanding and growing, it can dissolve altogether, just like the natural drift of our ancestral memories. So because plant knowledge grows out of interactions between human and plant communities, we need we need an ongoing practice rather than just stacks of documents and data to be able to represent it and to be able to conserve it. While both traditional and conventional knowledge systems recognize the importance of plants, it's traditional knowledge that places greater importance and emphasis on sustainability and the preservation of kinship. Today, the disconnect between the two is what reveals the power imbalance. Whilst we know that traditional knowledge, the loss of traditional knowledge leads to ecological problems like climate change and biodiversity loss, it's botany or conventional science which is still regarded the only authoritative source. So with this living archive, I'm attempting to address these issues and to move beyond binary thinking and towards a more holistic and connected way of relating to plants, but also to our role as caretakers of plant communities, which I believe is vital to our shared survival and future.